All right, let's jump into lesson 1-2. We're going to talk about properties of numbers today. So, the first property is called the additive identity property, which basically says that if I add 0 to something, it doesn't change the number. So, for example, if I do 3 plus 0, it's still 3. And in general, if I do any number n plus 0, I still get n. Okay? Next is the multiplicative identity property, which says that if I multiply something by 1, I still get that same number. So in general, any number times 1 or 1 times any number is still that number. All right. Additive inverse. Additive inverses have to add to 0. So for example, 5 plus -5 equals 0. And in general, n plus -n equals 0. Multiplicative inverses. Multiply to 1. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but these are always reciprocals. Reciprocals always add to 1. And that's a word that you should be able to recognize and know what it means. So, for example, if I do 8, what times 8 gives me 1? Well, it's 1/8. 8 times 1/8 gives me 1. What's another example? 2/3 times 3/2 equals 1. And in general, if I have some number, its reciprocal is 1 over n, and I multiply those together, and I get 1. Okay, let's try some examples here. So, example 1, we're going to find the additive inverse and the multiplicative inverse of each number. And I'm just shortening it because I don't want to write it all out again. So here's our first number, -9. What number? So if my additive inverse, I have to get to 0 by adding. So 9 plus 9 gives me 0. -9 times, what's its reciprocal? -1/9 gives me 1. Let's try another number. 4/5. 4/5 plus -4/5 gives me 0. Those are additive inverses. 4/5 times 5/4 gives me 1. Those are multiplicative inverses. All right, moving right along. A couple more properties here. We have the commutative property, the associative property, and the distributive property. The commutative property basically says that I can switch back and forth. So for example, 3 plus 5 equals 5 plus 3. And in the same way, 3 times 5 equals 5 times 3. Or in general, A plus B equals B plus A, and A times B equals B times A. That's what the commutative property says. It means that I can switch back and forth for addition and multiplication. The commutative property says that if I have multiple things, it doesn't matter how I've grouped them. So for example, if I have 3 plus 5, and then I add another 7, that's the same thing as if I did 3 plus 5 plus 7. Same thing goes for multiplication. 3 times 5 times 7 equals 3 times 5 times 7. The distributive property. We know the distributive property. 5 times 2 plus 8 is the same thing as 5 times 2 plus 5 times 8. All right, example 2. Identify the property. Identify the property. So let's say I have 9 times the square root of 2 equals the square root of 2 times 9. What property says that I can do that? Well, let's look back up here. Which property says that I can switch the order that I multiply? That's the commutative property. All right, let's pick a different one. Let's say I have 9 times 2 pi equals 9 times 2 times pi. So what property? I'm going in the same order, but I'm grouping them differently. Commutative, associative, or distributive. That is the associative property. I'm going to shorten it. I don't like writing. All right, let's do one more. Let's say that I have 2 times the square root of 3 plus 5 equals 2 times the square root of 3 plus 2 times 5. Well, that right there is an example of the distributive property. All right. Example 3. Sometimes, always, or never. True. I'm going to write a statement, and you have to decide if it's sometimes, always, or never true. So let's say C plus D equals C when D equals 2. So if D equals 2, is that sometimes true, always true, or never true? And you should be trying to think of different specific examples in your brain. So this is never true. So let's just say I have 1 plus 2 equals 1. Well, that is not true. 3 does not equal 1. So that is false. All right, let's try another one. A minus C equals C minus A. Sometimes, always, or never true. Well, can you think of an example when it would be true? I can. Let's say A and C are the same number. If I have 4 minus 4, does that equal 4 minus 4? Yes, it does. However, if I have 7 minus 4, does that equal 4 minus 7? No, it does not. So this one is sometimes true. All right, that is it for lesson 2. Go ahead and work on the problems for this lesson, and we will go over them when we see you back at school.